This is the narration for Module 5, Emotional Regulation. Our first slide, as always, is the norms. So here's the two norms that we have included, and then you can also add additional norms for your group. This is our community meeting. As always, please feel free to change the fourth question to something that maybe makes more sense for your group or something that you think would be fun. The impact of trauma-sensitive schools. This is the slide that we go through every time in every one of our modules. So this is just meant to remind everyone about why we are doing this work, and these are the areas that trauma-sensitive schools or compassionate schools can impact. This is our Pathway to Harmony slide. This is, again, just meant to be a reminder of this is how we get to where we want to go. So this is the path we've laid out for ourselves and within the heart, the folks that are impacted. Our three objectives for today: to understand the importance of emotional regulation within the trauma-informed care framework, identify self-regulation strategies, and then identify some self-care strategies. So we start off in this module with right away the Dr. Seuss slide, where we provide an example of a time when we may have used the concept of self-regulation or self-care in a professional setting. So just prior to facilitating this module, just try and think of a time that maybe you engaged in a self-care activity at work and that it benefited you or your students or the people that you work with in some way, or how it benefited you to be able to do that. Okay, so this slide we begin to explore the concept of self-awareness. Now, really, we have been talking about self-awareness throughout all of the last 4 modules, because we've really been working on understanding how and maybe even why we respond to things the way that we do. But starting here, and then for the remainder of this module, we're going to be looking at self-awareness and self-regulation as components of the larger concept of emotional intelligence, and how these components are really going to be the foundation for a lot of the work that we're going to continue to do together as individuals and as teams once the 5 modules are completed. So starting here, what we have are, it's an animated slide, so there's 5 little post-it notes with various statements that were taken from an emotional intelligence survey published by Psychology Today. These are just 5 of like 100 and something different statements or questions that are asked on this emotional intelligence survey. The purpose of this isn't for folks to identify areas of weakness that they need to strengthen or improve. It's really meant to be just raising awareness around what are the things that help me understand myself a little bit better, and how might I then, once I understand these things about myself, how might I then begin to increase my strategies to either mitigate some of the dysregulation I might experience, or how might I set myself up for success if I know these things about myself, and then set about to deliberately create relationships and teams of people that serve to strengthen one another through our individual strengths. So remember, we're looking for these sort of parallel processes of, as we strengthen ourselves as individuals and understand ourselves as individuals, then we strengthen our teams, and then we strengthen our school communities. But it all starts with the individual and our own awareness and our own ability to self-regulate. So that takes us right into self-regulation as a parallel process, as I just mentioned. So we start with the individual. So individuals can be regulated or dysregulated, and if we are unaware of our own emotional dysregulation, or if we're working with people who are consistently dysregulated, then we can maybe identify that and see that, and there's this sort of individual impact that it has independently within the school community. But it also has the ability to dysregulate a team. So I'm sure we've all seen this where we're part of a team, and maybe one person on that team is consistently dysregulated in some way or is struggling in some way, and that person's dysregulation tends to take the entire team off track or become dysregulated to the point where maybe the team is ineffective or spending a lot of time as more of a support group, which is fine occasionally to sort of be supportive of one another, but that can't be the sole purpose of the team for the entirety of our problem solving time or whatever. And then the other parallel process to that would be if you have a team or multiple teams within a school that are dysregulated consistently, then you create a potential opportunity for the school itself, the school community, to feel dysregulated. And we all kind of know and can identify when we're either working in, or sometimes it's easier to identify a dysregulated school when we walk on that campus, and we can kind of almost feel like an atmospheric shift taking place. We walk on the campus and we just feel that something is dysregulated about this school community. The tension is high, the toxicity of stress is high, and you can just almost feel it when you walk in. So dysregulation can happen in this parallel process of individual, team, and school. But on the other side of that, regulation can also happen in a parallel process where you can have individuals making a collective commitment to improve their own emotional regulation, which then can improve the emotional regulation of teams and of the school, and even in the opposite direction. So, if the school community makes a collective commitment to enhance regulation, emotional regulation as a community, then it can also have sort of that reverse parallel process that takes place. So self-regulation becomes a really important part of creating a school that is compassionate and that is trauma sensitive. Okay, so now that we've spent some time talking about the importance of emotional regulation, we want to offer our participants some strategies or techniques to help improve or maintain self-regulation. So what we have here are 4 different strategies that are for the breath, the mind, and the body. So hopefully at least one will resonate with any of the participants in your group. These strategies are really meant to be anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes long. They're meant to be in that moment when you feel your anxiety rising or your stress level rising, so you feel yourself becoming dysregulated, and you can use one of these strategies to help regain that sense of regulation. Some of the exercises are meant to just be kind of a one-time grounding activity. Others are meant to be something that you would repeat until you felt yourself becoming regulated. So it might take a few times of doing the particular technique or strategy before you start to feel yourself becoming regulated again. Each of the clouds is a hyperlink, contains a hyperlink to a YouTube video that demonstrates the technique being used. There's also descriptions of each technique in the notes so that you can demonstrate it yourself if that's more comfortable for you. If you would prefer, you can demonstrate it yourself using the notes as a guide through the activities. Also, it's important to kind of keep in mind or to convey to your group that each of these strategies can be taught to the kids as well. So as they get to the point where they're maybe wanting to start introducing some of these techniques to their students, each of these things can be used by a student, with instruction and support. They might just have to be modified a little bit for the developmental level. So maybe like the 5-4-3-2-1 exercise might be shrunk down a little bit, or the 4-7-8 breathing technique might be shrunk down a little bit to be more developmentally appropriate. Okay, so now that we've spent a lot of time talking about self awareness and emotional regulation, I want to take a few minutes to revisit the concepts of self care and vicarious trauma. And the glitter analogy offers us a really great way to talk about vicarious trauma because it really highlights the insidious nature of vicarious trauma. So, similar to glitter, when we expose ourselves or when we're exposed to the trauma symptoms of other people, it has the potential to stay with us even though we're not aware of it. So just like when we use glitter and then we wash our hands and we kind of move on and we think we're done with it, we've cleaned up, we've moved on. And then a few days later, we see a piece of glitter on our hand or in our hair or whatever. And we wonder how that's even possible. How does glitter show up unnoticed after all those days and all those efforts to clean up? And vicarious trauma is very similar to that. The glitter is analogous to those trauma symptoms that we're exposed to. And even though we might use our mindfulness techniques to regain our regulation or to maintain our self-regulation through those moments where our stress level has been risen or where our buttons have been pushed during that exposure, that glitter or the impact of those symptoms still sit with us, but we're not aware of it. It kind of sneaks up on us. And so maybe 6 months later, we ourselves are starting to experience sleeplessness or restlessness or irritability or whatever it might be, we're experiencing some of those symptoms. And even if we're aware of them, so our self awareness is maybe there and we're in tune to it, our mindfulness strategies are maybe a little less effective than they had been because it's no longer about that dysregulated moment where we've been triggered, it's about an actual symptom that we're experiencing. And so that's why the glitter analogy becomes a great way to talk about vicarious trauma and then to talk about the importance of maintenance self care versus emergency self care. Okay, so at this point, we want to sort of talk about the difference between emergency self care plans and maintenance self care plans. Up until this point, we've mostly been talking about emergency self care strategies or those mindfulness techniques that we talked about that are only like 3 minutes or 2 minutes or 30 seconds. Just in that moment when we feel ourselves becoming dysregulated, what are those quick things that we can do that can help us to regain our regulation or maintain our self regulation? And that's amazing and that's necessary. Definitely something we need to have in our toolkit. But we also want to make sure that we take a moment to think about our maintenance self care plan. So, like, what are we doing overall in our lives to maintain balance? And the maintenance self care plan, is one of our biggest weapons against vicarious trauma. Because, again, vicarious trauma is that insidious sort of trauma that sneaks up on us and little by little takes root when we're not even aware of it. But a maintenance self care plan can really help to buffer ourselves against the impact of vicarious trauma. So in this graphic, we see a self care wheel that encourages us to look at self care through these different categories or spokes on the wheel. And this one in the graphic is just one that was completed to give examples about what kinds of things might fall into each of these spokes. In the module, you're going to give the groups a blank one. And what I would do is just encourage them to give this some thought. This isn't something that we would expect them to just have right in the front of their minds, although some people might. Some people are really good about this. They might know right off the bat all of the things that fall into each of these categories. But some folks might need some time to really think about it and really think about how they might fit it into, what for most people are very, very busy lives. And that's real. That's a reality. Time and creating balance between all of our responsibilities is really challenging. So it might take some time for people to really think about what this looks like for them and how much time they might be willing or able to commit to it. So again, just an opportunity for folks to start thinking and practicing what this might look like without any pressure on them to just start doing it. It's really just meant to be an evolution towards something, again, something to aspire to, not something that we expect folks to be able to do right off the bat just because we handed them this piece of paper. With regard to that emergency self care plan, though, we want to encourage folks to really think about those mindfulness strategies, those techniques that we taught earlier, and then other ones that they might know. And then use this worksheet where it kind of asks them to kind of break things down. So, really thinking about where they feel stress emotionally and physically. What are their triggers? What are their buttons? Where do they feel it in their body? So, how do they know when this is happening to them, when they're becoming dysregulated? And then maybe 3 to 5 things that they can do in those moments to become regulated again or to maintain their emotional regulation. And then once they complete this worksheet, they might even want to take those 3 to 5 coping skills and just write them out on a little piece of paper and stick it in the back of their badge, just as a quick little visual reminder that, oh, yeah, these are the things that I know work for me and that I can do quickly and that will help me to become regulated in that moment until maybe that I can go home that night or maybe that weekend and engage in some of my more maintenance self care plans, like take a run or watch a movie or listen to some music or whatever it might be, whatever thing you might be able to fit in, just doing a little something for yourself to help with that maintenance piece of self care. Okay, so this is our summary slide where we provide participants with a reflection activity, give them the opportunity to jot down some of their thoughts while they're still fresh in their heads, or take the activity with them and do it later, whatever works for them. But I also want to take a minute here to talk about what comes next, because we've found that that's a big question that tends to linger in the air after the completion of Module 5. So, after the professional development component of Phase 2 is done, now what? So, really, the answer to that is practice. We've learned a lot over these last 5 modules about ourselves, or at least we've begun to explore learning about ourselves. And we've also talked about the idea that we don't expect that you can just flip a switch simply by being exposed to this information that would somehow change the culture and the dynamics at your school or at your team, within your team or within your classroom. That it takes a lot of practice. This work is really hard, and you're going to make mistakes. We're going to trip and fall. We're going to get bumps and bruises. But the concepts behind all of this information are that we are gentle with each other, that we're gentle with ourselves, that we remind ourselves that we are human, we are complex, we are emotional. And so we're going to make mistakes with this. We're going to do things that we quickly regret or say things that we quickly regret and that we identify as inconsistent with a trauma sensitive framework. And that's okay, that's normal, that's going to continue to happen. What we want to do from this point is just make a commitment to try, make a commitment to practice. Practice as an individual, practice as a team, practice as a school. And as we continue to do that, as we practice these strategies, as we make those collective commitments to one another and to our school community, we will start to see our culture shift and take root into the concept of wellness and of healing. And we will be having a committee of folks that works with your administration and a district coach that will be helping to identify how those things are going, where there might be areas that require additional support. If there's teams or people that need additional support, we will provide those things. But the next several months are really just dedicated to practicing these skills until they become second nature, or until they start to become second nature, so that we can then move forward to the next Phase 3, which will be the phase where we deliberately begin to create these environments for our students teach our students the same information in a developmentally appropriate way and envelop in the family and the school community. So thank you for your assistance and your help. Thank you for your commitment as a trainer and a facilitator, and for all the support and time that you've spent and dedicated to this work.